Check Podcasts.
Hey everyone, and welcome to Political Capital, your source for all the latest in BC politics. I'm your host, Rob Shaw. Lots to talk about on the show this week. The BC NDP picks a fight with the BC Greens over the mess that is its leadership race. BC tries to convince Ottawa to give it a hand on prolific offenders, and John Horgan starts doing his final interviews sort of reluctantly. To get into all of that, let's bring in the Pod Squad. And doth my eyes deceive me, or is that Katie Merrifield, Vice President of Wellington Advocacy's top strategist, the two former premiers, Director of the Pierre Poilievre campaign in BC, Andrew Wilkinson campaign? My God, it's been so long since we listed it all off. Katie, welcome back.
Thank you. I'm really happy to be back, and sorry I was away for a while.
No, that's okay. That's okay. It's just great to have you here. And Gillian Oliver, BC Greens strategist extraordinaire, is here, a steady, reliable, brilliant presence on the show each and every week. Hello, Gillian.
Hey, Rob.
And Jeff Ferrier, Senior Vice President at Hill & Knowlton Plus, slayer of internet trolls, and if you believe the leftist news websites, quite possibly the most influential and powerful lobbyist in the entire province of British Columbia. Jeff, hello.
Woo!
Wow, what an introduction for the three of us. I will say that I'm sad we're not going to get to what would Katie say today, but glad that we get to hear from her herself back on the show.
Yeah, every segment is what will Katie say, including our first topic. And while most of you were enjoying your Thanksgiving turkey dinner last weekend, the Greens and NDP were exchanging letters. And the NDP wants the Greens to turn over their membership list to a third party so they can check on how many Green members are signing up as NDP members to vote for Anjali Appadurai in the NDP leadership race, something that's not allowed holding dual memberships. The NDP says this is like a hostile takeover. The Greens told the NDP to go pound sand on their request, and so we will have to unpack that sand. Back and forth, the issue of dual memberships has been a topic this week, and the impact, if at all, on the leadership race. Katie, as our returning champion, you get to go first.
Awesome. So, look, I said a few months back the NDP were the model to follow for leadership races, but given current circumstances, I'm more than happy to revise that assessment. On the letters themselves, look, while the NDP approaching the Greens to inquire about membership abnormalities is understandable, sending a public letter with a veiled threat to deregister their party went way too far. The Greens have zero incentive to help the NDP after the 2020 election, let's face that. And leading with threats, I would argue, is not the best way to repair any relationships. On the dual membership issue, so again, vetting is a normal part of the leadership process. It's typically to ensure that the membership holder is who they say they are and confirmation that they paid their own membership. All parties do this. But asking them to prove when they left the Greens is not great optics for the NDP, a party aimed at progressive unity. And frankly, it may also come off as a bit bullying to members who aren't particularly politically engaged. And I have a few examples here. In the recent federal conservative leadership race here in BC, I know of more than a few very prominent federal liberals who took out conservative memberships to support Jean Charest with no intention to remain in the party after that. Is this annoying? Absolutely. Is there much you can do about it? No. The solution is having strong, viable new memberships of your own. And frankly, on that, EB failed spectacularly.
Yeah. Gillian, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I largely agree. It's about, it's against the constitutions of both the Greens and the NDP to hold memberships of other parties, but that's not the only thing that the NDP was going after. They wanted people to not have been a Green member after Horgan announced that he was stepping down, which is, I think the goal of any good leadership race is to attract new members. And we're talking about politically engaged people. It shouldn't be surprising that they might have been a member of another party. And I've said before, when I was running a Green leadership race, if we had signed up former BC NDP members, I would have seen that as a win. That means you're doing a good job. It's a good proof point that you're, in good standing to have a strong showing in the next election. That's the whole point. And, let's not forget the NDP aggressively goes after Green voters in every election. And now all of a sudden, when it comes time to choose the next premier, they're not good enough to have a say. I think that it was extreme. I think it was designed to sort of deflect blame from the NDP themselves, because they know that having to either disqualify Angela Paterai or to toss out a lot of her signups is going to be really controversial. It's going to turn off her supporters and drive a wedge within the party. And they're looking around to cast blame for someone other than themselves.
Jeff, what do you think?
Well, I think that the best way to do inlay work in veneer and woodwork is precision's really important.
Jeff always pivots to the woodwork.
Tight Bond 3 is the best glue that I found to make it so that it's seamless and good.
You were contractually obligated, sir, to address the question, I remind you.
Okay, fair enough. I've tried to deflect. It did not work spectacularly badly. Look, the NDP has smart, capable, experienced people doing this due diligence. If they're going to make these kinds of statements about hostile takeover, I've never made that statement, just to be clear. But if they're going to make these statements, I assume they have facts to back them up. But we'll see. We'll see if they do. For me, the issue, what was quizzical for me is that for me, the issue has never been the BC Greens. The issue has been the conduct of one of the candidates in the leadership in her campaign and their failure to be accountable. We all remember the vote buying video. We know there's investigations into third-party activities. All we've seen from the candidate has been denial, flight from reporters, claiming victimhood, pointing fingers. I've even heard that from some folks that some obscure blogs I've never heard of are taking personal shots at anyone who raises questions. Okay, that's fine. Fair game. We're out there in the public. But my message has been and will continue to be, it's not about the BC Greens, it's about that candidate. And if she wants to be premier, stand up, show leadership, admit when you make mistakes, show some contrition, acknowledge the impacts, and do what's necessary to make things right. And then people will pay attention to what you want to talk about. This week it was healthcare. There'll be other announcements in the week ahead. But until there's that accountability shown, there's going to be a lot of folks who've seen this kind of thing happen in the past with the NDP. I remember Carol James in 2014 facing the exact same kind of thing. Until there's that accountability, there's going to be a lot of folks who have cotton in their ears and won't want to hear anything she has to say.
It seems to me the core issue here is the NDP allowing its membership base to shrink down to only reportedly 11,000 members and become vulnerable to this idea of a takeover from a well-organized environmental movement that's backing a Paterai. And that internal issue is probably the real issue here, not blaming the Greens. Let's go around again and just talk about where we're at in the NDP leadership race now. We've got this looming decision on whether to approve or reject a Paterai's candidacy. Jeff, we'll stay with you for that. Where are we, and are we building to a head here, and what do we think is going to happen?
Wow, it's dramatic. I don't know what's going to happen. I'm not. What I know is that October 19th appears to be the date when a decision will be made on the candidacy. The process involves the chief electoral officer of the leadership race, who is doing the due diligence and investigating, making a recommendation to the provincial executive. And then the provincial executive, which is a body of elected New Democrat Party members, reviewing the information and making a determination whether it's yay or nay, or whether it's yay with conditions. I don't know what the outcome's going to be. We'll see. I've been pretty clear with folks throughout that I think the candidate should have been disqualified and a long time ago. But it's not up to me. It's not my decision. It's in the hands of the party, and I trust that they'll make the right decision, whatever
Katie,
that is.
Yeah. Katie, this is your first crack at kind of describing what you think of the race in a few weeks. What do you make of where we're at here?
Well, as you noted, 11,000 members as a base going into this race is unimpressive for a governing party. The NDP's all-star candidate, David Eby, failed to sell memberships, which should have been priority number one, regardless of status, given that low membership base. From my lens, the NDP have two choices. They risk Anjali's candidacy, given Eby's popularity with the base, or they DQ her, which would cause a significant fracture among the social justice climate activist wing of their party. Neither one of these are great. I thought it was interesting that Jeff said yay with conditions. I would be curious to see if that was an outcome. I don't think that we've seen that in previous leadership races, but that could be an option. Ultimately, what would be ideal for the NDP is that they get political cover from Elections BC, that Anjali did break the law or any rules. That would help them. And I don't think that they're going to get that, especially in a timely manner. And so without that, the optics for the party are pretty terrible. This is the second woman of color displaced by an establishment white male in the last 2 years. And that is completely outside of what the NDP claims to stand for. So they're not in a good spot right now. There's not great choices. But I look forward to a conclusion to this because it's taken an extraordinary long period of time to get to this place. Yeah, a series of difficult options there. Jeff, just to clarify, do you think, could you foresee conditions? I hadn't thought about that either.
Oh, well, the conditions I'm talking about, we have seen them in other parties. I remember when Todd Stone ran for the BC Liberals, there was questions about some of the members he signed up via a group called Aggregate IQ. Folks may remember those folks, and those memberships were pulled because there was clear evidence found by people in the BC Liberals doing due diligence that they violated the rules in getting those. So maybe there's a scenario here where, due to the due diligence, they're able to identify some problematic memberships that have been obtained inappropriately, and you take those out and then you move forward. But that's what I see as the conditions.
Okay, Gillian, building to a head here. Something's going to happen. What's your take of the place we're in?
Yeah, I think there aren't a ton of great options for the party. I think one of the problems is that nobody seems to know exactly how many members the Apatarai campaign signed up or inspired people to sign up. Even she herself has given extremely broad estimates of that number because we had so many disparate groups sort of encouraging their members and supporters to sign up to support a climate-focused candidate. So, yeah, I think, the party could toss out a bunch of memberships. It would probably have to toss out a lot, and then, we're talking about them totally putting their thumb on the scale in the favor of Eby, which I think would have more or less the same effect as disqualifying her in the eyes of her supporters. But I do think that it's better for David Eby, if he does win, to have a race. I think, we saw Angela Apatarai put out a pretty strong and compelling health platform this week, trying to change the conversation. And I think the Eby campaign looks kind of behind the eight ball on that. I think that, instead we saw the housing platform, but that was a couple weeks ago. I think that, in the absence of a decision from the party, getting out there and assuming that you're campaigning and inspiring people is going to help you no matter what the outcome of the disqualification is.
Can I just add one thing?
Sure.
You go first. I want to add one thing too.
Sure. Just speaking of political parties, and I speak from personal experience, being the executive director of a political party, I would posit, is one of the, if not the worst jobs in politics. So I just want to say sincerely, shout out to Heather and all the party staff, because regardless of how anyone feels about the landscape right now, I guarantee that these folks are working all hours trying to come to a resolution, and every second of that sucks. So solidarity.
Agreed.
That's
Agreed.
Awesome. I would also say simply that if there's a key takeaway and a lack of clarity about Apatarai's numbers is that the Dogwood group needs to keep better records.
All right. Okay, that's a good shot. That's a good shot. To me, there's an interesting timing issue here, which is not really the party's decision, but we either have a disqualified Apatarai and a Premier Eby by Halloween, or we have a race all the way to December where the government drifts for a couple months, and maybe Eby wins the end race in a slimmer margin than we thought and looks like kind of a weaker candidate by the end. Who knows? But they're very different paths we might be about to embark on depending on what the party decides in the next few days. Next topic, BC's two generals, Solicitor General Mike Farnworth and Attorney General Murray Rankin, took to Halifax this week. They met their provincial counterparts on the issue of prolific offenders, and they were looking for allies from other provinces on the issue of violent repeat criminals who get arrested and then released and then commit crimes again. Other provinces say they are experiencing this same thing. So BC is building a bit of a group here to pressure Ottawa to fix some of this through legal measures. There's a bill called Bill C-75 that it wants Ottawa to change. So progress or politics or what's going on here, Jillian? Let's start with you.
This law was introduced in 2019 with the purpose of decreasing the disproportionate incarceration of people of color, mostly Indigenous people. That is a really significant issue. Indigenous people represent just 4% of our population federally, but 37% of the prison population. Reports leading up to that law found that systemic discrimination occurs throughout the criminal justice system, including the courts. So the government put in this legislation to try to address it. But I think, the problem that we're running up against is that law and legislation, when it comes to justice issues, is really a blunt instrument. And we're sort of seeing unintended consequences with judicial discretion being limited in the other direction. But I think, it's a difficult thing to fiddle with because, on the flip side, if you go back and fiddle with it again, it's a blunt instrument on the other end that can lead to more people being incarcerated that shouldn't be because that discrimination still exists in sentencing and bail hearings. So I think, the government's out there trying to, make it clear to people because they're feeling the pressure from the opposition on this issue, that this is a federal issue in terms of the criminal code, but really its own report, the research leading up to the federal legislation showed that preventative measures are going to be much more effective. But the problem is, like we've discussed, is that those aren't going to be overnight fixes. The provincial prolific offenders report recommended 3 different kinds of new facilities, units to house people that have complex issues that are repeat violent offenders who don't really fit in the healthcare system or in the justice system. That's going to require a lot of resources and time to create. So in the meantime, we're seeing these kinds of statements.
Yeah, I think that's a good description of how complex it is and the systemic problems that the report identified. And, part of that is Bill C-75, Katie, but it's also a time-honored tradition for provinces to go kick Ottawa around every time they're in trouble to take the heat off of their shoulders. Is that what they're not mutually exclusive things. It can still be a problem and be politics, but what do you make of all this?
Yeah, let's touch on optics here. If anyone thinks that going to an FPT meeting and whining to Ottawa is anything resembling an effective strategy, let me disabuse you of that notion. So communiques, which are the official record of meeting outcomes, are often drafted well in advance of the meeting, and they also often include lofty blue sky promises to effectively work together to resolve unresolved issues. And in fact, after the Halifax conference, Minister Farnworth's public takeaway was, and I quote, "They listened to us and we're confident they're realizing this is a serious issue." So sound the alarm, guys. The solution is obviously on its way. Not. I think Minister Rankin made his position very clear. He made the NDP government's position very clear this week in the House when he said arrests are futile. And in his House debate on Bill 75 way back in 2018, he complained that the bill wasn't enough. It didn't go far enough, and the abolishment of mandatory minimums and drug decriminalization should have been included. So really, my message to viewers is, if you're sick of being a test bunny for progressive experiments in the application of justice, I suggest you vote for a party that leans conservative, because people have had enough.
Well, okay. I don't even have to set you up for a response, Jeff. Just go ahead.
So, yeah, just one point of clarification. Mr. Rankin said simply arresting is futile. So arresting, yes, it's important. That's why we have more prosecutors, better resource prosecutors. And remember, this is the government that stepped in Vancouver to make the left-leaning, or whatever it is, council there invest in policing when they were going to reduce what they were planning to invest by $5.7 million. So simply arrest is futile because, as Jillian points out, We need to address the root causes. This is what the expert of crime, this is what the expert report says we need to do. It involves investment in housing and poverty reduction, anti-racism, mental health, and addiction services for people. That's what's needed. And frankly, I'll take our minister going to Ottawa saying, let's fix the unintended consequences of a federal bill that has to be changed by federal legislators to make it work better for us. Then Kevin Falcon, Mr. Judges should judge harder and prosecutors should prosecute harder. And as a final point, I think last week in last week's show, I confused a lot of people by comparing Kevin Falcon to Barney Fife.
It's a deep cut.
Barney Fife, most people in my office called me a boomer because they had no idea who Barney Fife was. He was a sheriff from a little town called Mayberry on an Andy Griffith show from 1960 to 1965. Don Knotts was the actor. He was a 5-time Emmy winner, but now I'm talking like Murray Rankin. And what I should really say is that it's Charles Boyle from Brooklyn Nine-Nine
Charles.
is the better
How old are you?
Apparently, I'm super old.
All right. Well, that was a deep cut, but then a modern reference, so you balanced it out there. I think, there is a win here for the NDP in being able to point to other provinces that are going through the same thing. When the legislature comes back next week and they get hammered on this issue, they conceivably can have a little bit better argument to make than they did previously. And, the problem, I think, is that even if they push Ottawa to change this bill out, how long is that going to take? 2 years for federal legislation to change? There's got to be some type of interim regulatory or administrative change or whatever. But BC's mounted a coalition. They're preparing a letter of some type. They're going to follow up in a few weeks. So at least it's something. We'll probably still be talking about this topic in the weeks ahead. Stick around. If you're watching us on TV, hi. But also you should be subscribing to the podcast because we're going to have an extra discussion here about Premier John Horgan's retirement and his exit interviews. You want to stick around for that. Make sure you check us out on the Check Plus app for free previous episodes. Thank you so much for watching. We'll be back next week with all the latest in BC politics here on Political Capital.